Hello and welcome to Walker & Dunlop's Wednesday webinar. I'm Susan Weber, your moderator. I would like to welcome Willie Walker and his guest, Jay Carney, Senior Vice President, Global Corporate Affairs at Amazon. Willie and Jay will discuss Amazon's critical role in supplying America with essential items during the pandemic, how Amazon has continued to operate throughout the crisis, how they have adapted its business to the new normal, and more. Thank you for joining us, and now I will turn the call over to Willie.
Thank you, Susan, and welcome everyone to our seventh Walker Wednesday webinar. I know that we had over 9,000 people pre-registered for this, so we've got a great group on the line today. I want to thank Jay Carney for taking time to join me today and talk about Amazon and what Amazon is seeing in the markets today. I last week had a call with Barry Sternlicht that many of you attended, and we had over 9,000 people on that call and over 13,000 have subsequently watched it on YouTube. Everyone is obviously seeking information from far and wide in these troubled times, and it is a real honor for me to have my friend Jay join me today to talk about the perspective from Amazon. I owe my relationship with Jay, I owe thanks to my mom. My mother was the White House photographer for Time magazine for close to 20 years, and during that period of time, Jay was covering the White House for Time magazine. And so it's great to say thanks to Mom, and I know she's listening today, and I hope she's feeling better because she's been a little under the weather recently. But B, my relationship with Jay goes way back, long before he joined Amazon and long before he went on to actually work at the White House. He was covering the White House for Time magazine. Let me turn for a moment to what we're seeing in the retail world today from a commercial real estate standpoint, and then I'll get into my questions to Jay. CREFC put out a report last week on CMBS loans on retail, and there's $135 billion of CMBS loans on retail properties in the United States. ICSC's estimate was that revenues to those retail centers fell by $46.2 billion during the months of February and March, or about 8.7%. Those numbers were backed up this morning by the GDP numbers that were announced. GDP was off by 4.8, but retail sales were down close to 9% right on top of that. The biggest decrease was in consumer durables, automobile sales, obviously off dramatically. Personal consumption expenditures also decreased significantly in clothing and footwear, with the two bright spots being food and prescription drugs. As I was putting this together, my thought was to ask Jay, when is Amazon going to acquire either Walgreens or CVS? He's obviously not going to answer that question for me, but clearly a part of the market that Amazon has got to be looking at. If you look at CMBS performance, 20.6% of hotel loans in CMBS pools were within or beyond the grace period as of April 20th, and that's up from only 1.5% a month ago. So on hotels, 1.5 out of the grace period a month ago to 20.6%. And on retail, it's now at 10.7%, up from 1.7% a month ago. So significant number of loans that have moved beyond the grace period. As it relates to loans that have moved to special servicing, which means that they actually have had a default, 6% of hotel loans in CMBS pools are now in special servicing. That's up from 2.25% a month ago. And there's only been actually a minor uptick in retail from 3.1% this month, up from 2.7% in March. So just a slight uptick in CMBS loans on retail that have moved to special. But as it relates to outside of their grace period, there's been quite a significant kick up in both hospitality as well as in retail. There was literally no change in the special servicing volumes for multi-industrial and office month on month. And so those asset classes continue to perform extremely well. As it relates to forbearance requests, we're starting to see many retail borrowers ask lenders for forbearance. Many, rather than asking for forbearance, are asking just to go to interest only for a number of months and then come back to paying off their amortizing loans. One of our bankers in New York City said to me that right now his client base on the retail side is collecting somewhere between 15 and 20% of rents at this point. As we've mentioned before, what is somewhat odd in this crisis is that many of the credit tenants have stopped paying their leases, and many of the smaller mom and pop tenants are actually still paying, and that is obviously contrary to past crises where it's typically the non-credit tenants who default first and then the credit tenants who stick with you. Clearly showing the pain that some of those big national retailers are feeling right now, and also to some degree the leverage they think they have over the owners of the retail properties. I went out to our team to ask whether they were doing any new retail loans, and actually I was surprised to find that we have quite a few going on right now. One of the deals is a single tenant grocery store with a non-investment grade debt rating. It's got 17 years left on the lease, and we're getting really good quotes around 3.5% to 4% on that for a 7-year, mostly IO deal. And then we just funded last week 2 loans on strip malls, and those were smaller deals, $4 and $7 million loans. All in coupons were 3.87 and 4%. So while there isn't a ton of capital going to retail or hospitality right now, there are deals getting done for those sponsors who have good assets with long-term leases, and typically on the grocery side of things with a grocery anchored retail. On the spreads and where we are as it relates to the Fed buying program, spreads have remained very tight. The Fed was in the market yesterday buying agency CMBS. They bought $412 million of bonds yesterday. That's down significantly from what they were doing 2 and 3 weeks ago. But the Fed stepping in and buying $300 to $500 million of paper on a weekly basis is really helping to support the market. And the spreads that we've talked about in the past for Fannie and Freddie paper at sort of swaps plus 70 to swaps plus 85 is holding very tight, and the Fed is doing exactly what it needs to do to support that market. As it relates to capital deployment, you heard Barry Sternlicht last week talk about Starwood going after a hotel before the hotel got a PPP loan and pulled itself off the market. I talked to one private equity sponsor over the last week who raised a special situations fund at the end of March, and they have already deployed $1.2 billion of equity capital over the last 3+ weeks, mostly buying notes, agency paper that was being sold at distressed levels, but they also actually just took down a pretty significantly sized seniors housing portfolio, which is a very, very counter-cyclical play, if you will, or contrarian play, given the virus getting into many seniors housing operations and many people being afraid of what rent levels look like in the seniors housing space. But interesting to see several large sources of capital raising funds and starting to invest in this market at this time. But all eyes right now are on May rent payments. April is ending quite well for most of Walker & Dunlop's borrowers. Collections have steadily increased throughout the month. And as I've been talking to our clients and asking them for predictions on what happened to rent rolls, what will happen to rent rolls in the month of May, I've been generally getting somewhere around 3 to 5% down, although I have had the outlier who said we're expecting 10 to 15% down. It is anyone's guess what May 10th to May 15th will look like, particularly on the multifamily side as it relates to rent collections. I would only say that the common themes are communicate with your tenants. Fingers crossed that a lot of the government stimulus money has made it out to renters across the country. And I guess the final point is that people start to see economies across the country getting back to work, and therefore the hopes of getting a job again, pay their rent, stay safe in their apartment, and hopefully that all works its way through the system to benefit everybody. I now want to turn to my friend Jay Carney. So Jay, you went to Yale. You were an exceedingly successful journalist at Time Magazine. You were the White House press secretary for over 3 years for President Obama. I'm just curious, Jeff Bezos is known for asking potential hires what their SAT scores were. Did Jeff ask you your SAT scores when you interviewed with him for the first time?
Well, he didn't, and if he had, maybe he wouldn't have hired me. That wasn't the strength of my application. No, he doesn't do that. A lot of that falls into the category of pure myth about Jeff. I mean, certainly Jeff I know and work with every day. One of the reasons why I went to Amazon, I probably told you this, but when I left the White House in the summer of 2014 and took some time to try to figure out what was next, and I really wanted to do something completely different. I didn't want to be, I didn't want to take the tried and true path of just being a consultant and a talking head on television, and I was really intrigued with companies that, especially tech companies that were innovative and doing creative things. I spent a lot of time out in Silicon Valley and met with a lot of people, and I got a call about Amazon and was open to speaking with anyone. I hadn't really been thinking about it at the time, and I went up and I met with a lot of the senior business leaders, including Jeff, and I had just a remarkable day. And what I loved about Amazon then and love now that I'm well past my 5-year mark there is that it's the culture. It may be because we're Seattle based and not based in the Bay Area, but there's a scrappiness to the place and humility to the place that I've always liked. And if you go back to that period when I was looking for a new challenge, tech and Silicon Valley were kind of bells of the ball at the time, and I think there was a lot of hubris at the time about tech in that culture, in that milieu down, especially in the Valley, and I found Seattle to be quite different. And I loved that Amazon was a tech company, but it was a tech company that was also grounded in the physical world. Our core business is retail, and that requires enormous number of people. We have employees in over 40 states, and it requires, it's a different business model. So it's been a great run. Amazon's been, I've learned more here than I could have imagined.
So your past two bosses have been the most powerful person in the world, Barack Obama, and the richest person in the world, Jeff Bezos. What is it about those two leaders, and extraordinary leaders both, that you have observed from having worked with both of them so closely?
Well, they're obviously different. They're quite different, and that's reflected in the paths they took in their lives and their careers. But one way in which they're very similar is that they both focus very much on the long view. And they're both in worlds that traditionally don't reward that. So in politics, especially in modern politics, the urge to win the day and win the week and fight every battle as it comes up is powerful, and it's the way that politics is normally conducted, especially here in Washington, D.C., in our national politics. But President Obama, because remember, he was nobody until he was somebody, and suddenly he was president. And he did not live his life in Washington, and he didn't live his life in the public eye, and he didn't, until he was elected to the Senate 2 years or 4 years before he was elected to the presidency. He didn't live with the sort of stamp on him that said, you could be a president one day, right? And he didn't conduct his life that way. So he wasn't very good at that kind of transactional day-to-day political battle. And there was downside to it. We would go in to see him sometimes, I and some other of his advisors, and recommend he say this or do this. And he would listen to us, and sometimes he'd agree, but often he'd say, you're probably right, but I'm not going to do that. And, we'll take our lumps, but here's why. And it was always a reason about the long view, the long term. And that was very gratifying to see, especially in the political world that we live in. Jeff's been the same way in business. I mean, he has, since he founded Amazon, told shareholders and his colleagues at the company that, don't look at our quarterly earnings. Don't measure your success by the stock price. Think and plan for the future, invent for the future, and invest in the future. And that's what he's done with the company. And there was a lot of I think in the early days there well before my time, there's a lot of skepticism about that approach. But I think he's shown that taking that long view, not governing the company, quarter to quarter, has been great for customers, most importantly. But it's also allowed us as a company to explore new businesses, to invest in areas that may or may not pay off. Right? There's, for every success that Amazon has had in a new business line, we've had multiple failures, and but the successes only come because you have the freedom to experiment and innovate and fail, and it's a great culture to be a part of.
When you were first hired by Jeff a number of years ago, as you just said, almost 5 years ago, there was a lot of talk about your crisis management expertise, having been in the White House and being able to deal with a huge amount of data, figuring out how to create a strategy, convey that strategy, stick to that strategy, what have you. What have you, if you will, drawn upon from that crisis management playbook over the last 2 months at Amazon since the coronavirus fell upon us?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, it in ways, government and business are different in many ways, and they should be. But there is a similarity to the way I think we collectively as a society have had to mobilize, and then a company like Amazon, because we have so many employees and are so present around the country and the world, that there's similarity in terms of how we've had to mobilize that I think is not governmental necessarily, but it requires broad policy decisions and quick thinking. I mean, like everyone, we were in a situation at Amazon where we had to learn as we went as the COVID crisis began to take root. We very early, because we're a global business, made the decision to end all non-essential travel well before there were any kinds of shutdowns here in the United States. And then, then we took steps to work from home fairly early for all of our corporate offices. And then we have, because of the nature of our core business, our retail business, we have this situation that we've confronted where our customers are depending on us, have been depending on us more than ever, because they have to stay at home, and online shopping is not just a convenience, but it's in many ways a lifeline and a necessity. So that's created enormous demand, but we've also had to take significant steps and expensive steps to adjust the way we do business in all of our fulfillment centers, our warehouses, and the rest of our distribution network to ensure the safety and health of our employees. So a lot of this has been learning on the fly, and it's been extraordinary to see the innovative business minds in our leadership applied to these new sets of problems that that the coronavirus has presented, and it's been gratifying. We're still learning, and we're still making changes to adjust.
And Jeff has stepped back in from on a kind of a day-to-day operating role given the crisis. Big article last week in the New York Times about that. I would assume that since Jeff has spent so much of his time sort of thinking out on that long ball strategy that you're talking about, whether it's the space endeavors or other things where he's been spending the majority of his time and thinking, what's it like now that he's back in from an operating standpoint? Because my assumption is there were lots of senior executives who had sort of those operating roles and responsibilities taken care of. So all of a sudden, Jeff comes back in on a day-to-day basis. You've been around long enough to know what it was like sort of when Jeff was still more engaged, then less engaged on the day-to-day, and now right back into it. What's sort of changed over the last month and a half?
Well, while I have no beef with that article, I mean, one thing that I don't think it was quite clear on is Jeff, it was his mental model, his orientation in terms of his engagement at Amazon that changed because of COVID, not his day-to-day engagement. I mean, I report directly to Jeff, and but I work for Amazon, and I engage with him every day often multiple times a day pre-COVID, and I do that now. So it's just that he was thinking in his Amazon world, which is still overwhelmingly the dominant world in his business life. He was always thinking, he was using his time to help the teams think about projects that were more long-term. And, he used to talk about, or he would talk about, that he gets to live in the future. And by that he meant not, the future 200 years from now, but the future 3 to 5 years from now, because the investments we make now as a business that are long-term in their nature, will, if they succeed, will succeed 3 to 5 to 10 years from now. So what's changed is that he has become seized by by this crisis, and has been directing all of us in our efforts to deal with it. So on things that are very much today, like how do we get masks to our employees today? Like, what do we do? What are the supply chain challenges? Where's the supply? How can we shorten that cycle? What steps? He was very involved in all the steps, the process changes that we implemented in our fulfillment centers, from that ensured social distancing, so staggering start time, so fewer people were in our sites at the same time, to ending our stand-up meetings that they would have in those facilities. That was a time when people would congregate, to again ensuring the supply of PPE, masks and gloves, we have now had for a number of weeks temperature checks at every one of our sites at the beginning of the day. So those are the kinds of things that Jeff would not have been involved in, because they were or not as much involved in, because they were sort of today's problem, what's today's answer or today's solution, and if not today, tomorrow, and as soon as possible. So that's where I think he's had to push off some of the energy we put into the longer-term business plans and investments to focus on the here and now.
So I want to ask one last question on sort of the management of Amazon right now, and then move much more towards sort of the marketplace and what you're seeing. But my understanding is that there are 18 people on Amazon's S team, which is your senior leadership team. First of all, does S stand for senior or SWAT or special? What's the S stand for? And then second of all, any comparisons or differences between an S team meeting and a cabinet meeting that you participated in both? What's anything between those two that is just wildly different or actually pretty similar?
Yes. What's wildly different about it is that like dressing up for an S team meeting in Seattle is wearing a collared shirt and not a T-shirt. So and not many people dress up. So that the formality of a White House appropriately is quite different. And the nature of the meetings and the content are obviously is quite different. That's a great question. I think it's senior team. It's been the name for the leadership team for many, many years, long before I started. We recently added members to the S team. I think we might be up in the 2021 range of members, and that's great because more ideas at the table, different perspectives, different brains. It's super helpful, and we meet as a leadership team frequently, in full, and then sometimes smaller groups of S team meet on specific subjects. But not very much like the White House, not a cabinet room meeting.
So transitioning to the crisis, you were on Air Force One on 9/11 with President Bush. You were in the White House the day that everyone was in the Situation Room watching Osama bin Laden be taken out by U.S. SEALs. And you've also been there with Jeff as he's announced incredible breakthroughs in technology that has driven Amazon's business. What character traits or habits have you seen in those leaders at those moments that for someone who doesn't get that eye to history, if you will, is something that you have seen in those leaders as it relates to how they've dealt with this? I mean, there was a moment where all of a sudden at Amazon it was like, uh-oh, this really is going to be something major. Like what did Jeff do or say to get the team headed in the right direction? What did you see Obama do or Bush do in those moments that few other people get the opportunity to view those leaders actually processing the information and what they've got to deal with?
Right. Well, I think the analogy, sorry, I broke up a little, Willie, but hopefully everybody can hear me. I think the analogy holds up only so far, because the kinds of things that you mentioned, both when I was a reporter and with traveling with President Bush on 9/11, and even the special ops action against bin Laden 10 years later, almost 10 years later, those are the kind of problems that only presidents deal with. And in the first case, an attack on the United States, that's the kind of flash happening that changes your world and changes. I mean, it changed everyone's world, but it also changed, the nature of the Bush presidency and all the kinds of decisions you have to make with unbelievable speed. I think, and then in the case of President Obama on the bin Laden mission, he had to make this very gutsy decision with incomplete intelligence, and when he was being told by his top military advisors, including the head of the operation, that chances of success, i.e. that it was in fact bin Laden, were 50-50, and he had to make that call and would take the responsibility regardless of what happened. Those are the kind of, that's why being president's, unlike any other job, it's not really all that similar to being a CEO in that regard, because of the enormity of those consequences. CEOs have an enormous amount of responsibility and pressure, but they also, it's almost more like a parliamentary system. Like if you're in control of your business and you collectively or individually make a decision to invest in some area, and you get to execute on it and implement it and see if your customers like what you've done and reward you for it, and then you're judged later as a success or a failure, but you have more control, I would say. And what presidents, ironically, because they are the most powerful people in the world, individuals anyway, they often don't have nearly as much control as you think over the events that determine the success or failure of their presidency.
Really interesting. So let's turn to the crisis and Amazon's response to it, because as I said previously, I mean, I have one colleague who lives in Rhode Island, and I was talking to him about bringing you on, and he said, the only vehicles I've seen go up and down my road over the last month literally are Amazon Prime trucks. So no one's driving their cars, no one, seemingly nobody else is out there other than you all. Analysts are predicting that your revenues that you guys will announce tomorrow in your earnings call are up at 25% on the quarter, yet expenses are going to have gone up significantly because you had to pay overtime and you've had to, in some cases, double salaries. And you all were already a leader as it relates to raising your minimum hourly rate to $15 an hour across the country. Talk for a moment about just the general challenges that you all have had as it relates to staffing. You've got 400,000 workers in U.S. distribution facilities. Many people like Walker & Dunlop, for instance, when this all broke out, our big concern was get everyone out of the office, make sure that they're all safe, and we can figure out how we continue to transact business. You and few other companies had the very, very real challenge of saying, we got to stay in it. We got to protect our people. We've got to continue to operate and distribute these goods across the country, and you've done it almost seamlessly, although I've read, people saying, oh, I didn't get my Prime order in, exactly the same amount of time I was getting it previously. And I would hope that person got someone writing back on the message board, be happy you got anything. But how have you all managed with this crisis? Just because, you do have 400,000 workers. I saw something that says that you're going to be potentially hiring another 75,000. Talk through just the logistics of all of that as you went into this, because you guys almost uniquely had to deal with this on a massive scale, both from a distribution standpoint as well as from your retail operations at the Whole Foods stores across the country that have not shut down and have continued to provide food to the American consumer seamlessly.
Well, thank you, Willie. I think, we, as I said earlier, the nature of our retail business, because most of it is online, although we do have physical stores like Whole Foods stores, has been, has meant that we have become a vital service for millions and millions of customers. And we take that responsibility very seriously. And one of the things we did early on was prioritize the intake, stocking, and shipment of essential items, medical supplies, household staples, the kinds of things that were most in demand and most immediately needed by customers. And that prioritization meant that we had to change the way that non-essential items, items that weren't on that list, were being brought in and stored and shipped, and other mechanisms were put in place to ensure that we were moving most quickly on the essential items. So that's that's how, as you talked about, or why some items that weren't essential that people ordered weren't coming as quickly as customers had gotten used to them coming. Now we've been able to, as sort of the situation in our supply chains and our facilities has stabilized, to return to normal in terms of our mechanisms for making sure that our customers are getting the things they order in the kind of a timely fashion that they've become used to. But we're very proud of and sure that we did the right thing by prioritizing those items early on. In the manpower, on the manpower question, I mean, we were already, a very large employer, and we already paid $15 minimum, more than double the federal minimum wage for our starting employees in our fulfillment centers. And when we saw demand spike in the way that it does for a holiday season, for example, but a holiday season you can plan for, when we saw demand spike the way it did because of COVID, we had to meet that demand, and that meant initially hiring 100,000 people, and then when we quickly filled those roles, hiring another 75,000. We're in the process of doing that now. So our distribution network employee base is in this 500,000 to 600,000 range globally now, at least. And we raised our minimum wage for this period from $15 to $17 an hour. And we doubled, we made overtime instead of time and a half, double time, so $34 an hour. We we put in place sort of COVID-specific benefits in terms of extended paid time off. We had a policy of no questions asked, unpaid leave if people just didn't, for either circumstances at home or because they didn't feel like they wanted to come to work in this situation. They were able to take off and not worry about their job status. So all of these things, as you noted, these things, as well as the supplies of protective gear that we provided to our employees, required a big investment, and you're right that it's definitely balanced against that demand. This has been an extraordinary time in many ways.
So given how big given your supply chains, you mentioned PPE previously and trying to get it. First of all, tell me that Amazon can get it, because if there's any company in the world that actually hopefully has the inroads to getting things like PPE, it would be Amazon. And then second of all, it's my understanding that you guys are building your own testing facility. Is that going to be just for Amazon employees, or are you going to start processing testing for third parties?
On the first question, yeah, we had to scramble like everyone else. There was a global shortage of some of these necessities, the masks and gloves and sanitizers. We obviously source from around the world, and we were able to tap that network to get those supplies as quickly as possible. But in the early days, we did not have all that we needed or all that our customers needed, much like any other retailer. So the teams worked extraordinarily hard to fix that problem, and were very creative in how they figured it out. And that's going to continue. On the testing, we are, Jeff has said, my boss and others have said, business leaders have said, and I think they're quite right, that the key to getting back to normal, to getting our economy up and running again, is plentiful, scalable testing capacity, and that means enough tests available everywhere so that anyone can be tested regularly, not just people with symptoms, but asymptomatic people, so that employers can know with certainty who's sick and who's not, who needs to self-quarantine or who needs medical care, and then who's not, so that the employees who are coming back to work when that's possible can feel comfortable and safe because everybody's been tested, and the folks who are testing positive are getting the care they need, and they're self-isolating or being quarantined. So as you know, that testing capacity has been scarce and hard to come by across the country, and so we've taken steps to begin to build our own capacity. It's not a business or an arena that we've been involved in the past, but we have started, we built our first lab and began the process of offering tests to frontline employees. But these are early days, and our hope is that other institutions, both private sector and governments, also engage in this effort to quickly scale the availability of tests that are reliable and that produce results on a fast turnaround basis. Because I think, until we get a vaccine, that's the only way really for normalcy to return in anything like a way that we recognize. For us, it's early days. I mean, we have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of our own employees, and we're sharing lessons learned as we go through this process. But I wouldn't want anyone on this call to think that somehow we're this, even a company of our scale can do this alone. It requires collective action.
So prior to the crisis, there was plenty of talk about the size and scale of Amazon and Amazon's huge influence over e-commerce. I think your percentage of e-commerce in the United States is around 37% pre-crisis, and if the projections are that your sales have gone up by 25%, that's pushing your share of e-commerce well into the 40% range. Does this crisis and sort of the incredibly important role that Amazon has played in supplying the American consumer, does it help make people understand the importance of Amazon and the size and scale of Amazon, or does it hurt in that Amazon continues to be bigger and bigger, and those calls for either breaking up Amazon or peeling Amazon out of certain markets gets even stronger?
Well, let me just say that, as you know, Willie, it's a fallacy to suggest that Amazon is as big as we are often perceived to be. I mean, a couple points. The spike in e-commerce it's been driven by this COVID crisis. That's all of e-commerce. That's not just us. We'll have to see what the numbers reveal, but obviously the costs associated, as we talked about earlier, are quite high as well. Separately, e-commerce to this day only represents, and these are outside assessments, independent assessments, 11 or 12% of retail in America. And while it might be a surprise to some because we get a lot of attention, we're not even close to the biggest retailer in the United States. Walmart is 2.5 times our size. And it's also, maybe there was a time when the sort of dividing retail between online and offline and treating them differently might have made sense, but there really aren't any serious players who aren't both now. Amazon, we got our start in online retail, and we are a major online retailer, but as you know, we've invested heavily in physical retail in recent years, not just with our purchase of Whole Foods markets, but in building our own Amazon stores, Amazon 4-star, Amazon bookstores, and other physical stores. And that's a reflection of our belief that retail is the right way to approach retail is by listening to the customer, and the customer wants both. The customer wants physical and the customer wants online. And there are things for which the customers are often going to go to a physical store for in a post-COVID world. And there are things that they're going to be happy to go online for. And I think the successful retailers of today and tomorrow will be those that meet customers where they are. And so that's just as you know, Amazon is only 4% of U.S. retail total, so far from in competition terms, far from anything that comes close to dominance, and less than 1% globally. There's not a country where we do business where we're the biggest retailer in that country, including the United States. So we happen to be very customer facing, and we're unbelievably lucky that we have as many customers as we have. But it's important to put our scale in perspective, because retail is a very, very big market.
So you talk about that multi-channel strategy, which clearly many of the traditional retailers started bricks and mortar and are trying to move into e-commerce, and you all started e-commerce and are moving into bricks and mortar. Obviously, the last couple of weeks have made a lot of people scratch their heads about bricks and mortar retail. The numbers that I talked about previously as it relates to the number of CMBS loans on retail properties that have moved to special servicing, not that many, but that are now moving into delinquency, has spiked dramatically. Over the last couple of weeks, has the thought of that sort of multi-channel distribution strategy been sort of tested and thought about in a different way at Amazon?
No, and I think that these are extraordinary times, and everyone's goal, including ours, is to get us back to normal, or whatever a post-COVID normal looks like, as quickly as possible. And that, our faith in the investments we're making in physical retail remains. And I think that, look, we're going to have a vaccine at some point, and prior to that, hopefully we'll have the testing capacity that we need that will allow physical stores to reopen, and will allow other businesses to reopen, and to have the economy come back in a way that feels close to normal, if not fully normal. And I think we've learned a lot. We will have learned a lot of lessons, but a lot of retailers will have learned lessons, and will make adjustments accordingly.
So, final question on real estate. You ran the HQ2 process at Amazon. I guess a couple questions on that. First of all, as it relates to your investment in Northern Virginia, does Northern Virginia, the original spec was one city, $5 billion of investment and 50,000 jobs. Then you picked two cities, so seemingly dividing, if you will, that investment in both capital as well as human resources. And then, as we all know, you backed out of New York and are now really focused on Northern Virginia. Does Northern Virginia get that full $5 billion and 50,000 jobs, or does one of the other, I think it was 238 total cities who pitched to get Amazon HQ2 to come to it, does one of those other cities get picked for sort of an HQ2 too?
Well, the short answer to that question is, no, we don't have any plans to have another headquarters in the way that we're building here in the DC capital region. We're still, as you know, building out here in Northern Virginia, and we've leased space with our excellent partners, JBG Smith here. And as we're building our own structures there, hiring is continued, and we're beginning to scale. But it will be some time, of course, before we get to the 25,000 mark. So we have the luxury of time of deciding as we grow where we're going to have employees. Notwithstanding the HQ2 process and the desire to concentrate our growth in another location outside of our original headquarters. We also have a lot of corporate employees and centers, with a healthy number of employees in various cities around the country. So that that process continues. And, we've had, just since you mentioned it, we've just had a great experience here with both political leaders and business leaders and community leaders in Northern Virginia and in the DC area. It's been a great partnership, and I can't, as somebody who's born and raised in this area, I'm thrilled that this project is taking shape.
So turning to a couple other of Amazon's business lines, I'm just curious, have you met Alexa, and is she blonde or brunette?
The great thing about Alexa is that she is whatever you want her to be, right? And including her voice can change and her accent. Like Alexa's, I'll tell you a great story about this. When I started in March of 2015, the most recent device that Amazon had created and launched with great fanfare was something that not a single person on this call owns today, the Fire Phone. It was Amazon's entrance into the smartphone market, and it was the result of extraordinary amount of investment and technological development, and there were some features to it that were groundbreaking. It didn't work. It didn't work. It failed. It was a multi-billion-dollar failure. A lot of companies would have said, you know what, we got out over our skis. It's not really our core competency. Well, let's go back to what we do well. Let's not invent, new devices, try to do that kind of thing. And yet already in development and launched in beta not long after I started was the first Echo device, which, by the way, got its start with the idea that Jeff had of creating the Star Trek computer in real life. Now, that could have failed too, but because who knows, ultimately, you make a lot of educated guesses, the teams do, the tech teams and the other teams, about what customers will want and what they'll find rewarding. But these are guesses and bets, and it turned out that Echo and the Alexa service were received incredibly well, and we had that first-class problem with the first Echo devices, which is we didn't have enough of them, which is not a great problem to have, but it's better than having too many that you can't sell. And and the rest is history in the fact that so many customers have loved the service and loved the devices, and teams keep innovating, creating new variations and making improvements. So it's super exciting.
So on that, as I was sitting around thinking about my questions for you, I was saying, there's got to be a number of times where Jay was both in government as well as at Amazon, where he's shown something and he says, "We can do that." Like, just sort of like, whoa, like, we can do that? Do you have anything within the bounds of sort of, obviously, both non-disclosure on the government side of things or at Amazon on things that we all now know about, where there was one of those moments where someone shows you something, you're just like, we can actually do that?
Well, I can talk about one in the Amazon context in that, because it's now a reality, but in my first few years, I would go visit an unmarked building in Seattle to take a look at a project that was underway that was built around the idea of just walkout technology. The idea that you would have a physical store where you could walk in and walk out without paying, but also without stealing. And it seemed crazy. I mean, and crazy. It just seemed like, how could that work? How could technology work in a way where you could walk into a store, grab what you wanted, stick it in your basket, stick it in the paper bag, walk out, and never approach a cash register or a touch screen or anything, just go. Well, we have those stores now in multiple cities, the Amazon Go stores, and it's magic. If you've never been to one, the one in Seattle is the original one that opened is in my building, my office building in Seattle on day one. It's also Jeff's building, and my apartment's nearby, and I do all my shopping there. And every time I go, and I've been hundreds of times, I feel like I'm stealing. Like I was like, I walked down the side, like I was like, God, did anybody see me walk out with all this stuff? And then moments later, it pops up on my phone, my receipt, and it's always accurate. It's really, like, I still am stunned that the technology works. So that's one where I got to see something in its early days when nobody was sure, and they tried everything. They tried all sorts of different interesting, solutions, potential solutions to the problem, and then the teams, delivered a product that is really extraordinary.
So on that, as far as cutting edge technology, there was the 60 Minutes piece on the drones, and there's been heightened, I guess, reattention on that issue now, given the world we're living in today and people wanting things essentially to kind of drop out of the sky into their backyard. You're obviously on the front lines as it relates to the FAA and the ability to get drones flying around cities and dropping off goods and all that kind of stuff. How far away are we from the effective deployment of drones to deliver goods and services, not services, goods? Right.
Look, this will happen. The technology is well within our reach and the reach of others, and getting the right regulatory infrastructure in place to ensure people's safety and the efficient operating of a service like that is the key. I think it will happen sooner in some countries than others, depending on the disposition of the governments and the kind of regulatory structure they have. But we're working really closely with my teams on the policy side are working closely with regulators in that space, and we are pleased with our progress. But I don't have an update on timing, except that it will happen. For the reasons that you mentioned, even pre-COVID, which is that customers are going to want this service, right? And the done well, so that it's unintrusive, it's quiet, it's incredibly safe, and safety is the highest priority on our teams as they develop this. It will, I think, once it becomes normal, people will be surprised that that they had that they were worried about it, and for whatever various reasons. And if you think about a surprising stat for me was that something I learned earlier, that a huge number of our deliveries, even if there are multiple products, they can be multiple small products, and they're small enough to be delivered. The full delivery is small enough to be delivered by drone, and the reduction in congestion in congested areas on our streets when there's that kind of service available will be, I think, beneficial in many ways. The reduction in pollution and the like. So I think, stay tuned is probably the best I can say.
Okay. As I was thinking about Amazon Web Services at this time, just the number of, I don't know whether Zoom is a client of Amazon Web Services, but if it is, just thinking about the scaling of the cloud and everything that's going into the cloud right now has got to be driving a huge amount of customers to Amazon Web Services. I guess as I was thinking about that, Jay, I was thinking about the fact that on the retail front, you guys compete with Walmart and other massively scaled companies. On the entertainment side, you compete with Disney and Comcast, and on the Amazon Web Services, you compete with Microsoft. I was sort of sitting there going, why don't these guys pick a space that they're not going up against like the biggest and most sophisticated competitive set you could possibly go find? But it is unbelievable to me how Amazon Web Services has not only grown, but as Jeff said at the Economic Club of Washington when he spoke last year, he was very surprised about the head start that you guys got with Amazon Web Services. Could you talk about that for a second? Jay, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Sorry about that. What I know, my phone was ringing here, so I put it on mute. What I know about that, I know from Jeff and from Andy Jassy, the CEO of Amazon Web Services, and that is that, the idea to, as Amazon was building out its own server capacity needs for its Amazon.com business, and its compute power needs, and there was a recognition. This is long before my time, obviously, that how, especially in businesses like retail work, there are peak periods, but a lot of businesses have peak periods of demand and then troughs. And in the old world of on-premises IT infrastructure, you'd have to have your own server and your own compute power and your own data storage, all that kind of stuff, and you had to have it enough capacity and pay for the goods that could meet your highest demand period. And what that meant is you had all sorts of wasted capacity that you weren't using otherwise. And it was, you know, the leaders at Amazon, their idea that it was like, well, we could rent out that capacity for us. You know, when we're building this capacity for ourselves and we have this, you know, excess capacity, we could rent it out. And that was basically the birth of public cloud. And, you know, what has now become so common. And I think what Jeff said at that event that you referenced was that normally in this space, you know, and probably in all business, but I think he was talking about tech in particular, when you create something new, when you innovate a new product or services, you know, your unbelievably good and smart and well-resourced competitors take a year, maybe two, to match what you have. And for reasons that are not quite clear, we had about a 5-year head start in cloud. And Jeff at the time speculated that maybe it was because people didn't, you know, see sufficiently clearly that Amazon, while a retailer, was in fact a tech company that was driven. I mean, all of our businesses, you know, including our core businesses, you know, you know, work because of, you know, artificial intelligence and machine learning and you know, just a lot of effective tech. And they didn't take us seriously, Amazon seriously, as a contender in that space. So what it meant was that because the teams are always so customer focused, and that means like not just saying, oh, we built this service, customers love it, let's sell it and celebrate it. It was like, okay, we built this, but what else do customers want? What more, you know, what added services can we provide? What can we do to lower prices for customers? And that sort of Amazon cultural spirit infused the AWS teams as they grew from that initial stage, and even as some of the, you know, very, very strong and deep-pocketed tech companies that you mentioned began to get into the cloud space. But that advantage has served us well. You know, I think you know, there really isn't, and I'm no expert on the tech piece of this, but I certainly know that there's just no similar, there's not a company that provides the scale and the range of services and the redundancy and the security that AWS provides.
So my final question, and it's an outlook question. When you were at Time, you sat around with the likes of Strobe Talbot and Walter Isaacson at the end of
Diana Walker.
Diana Walker, yeah, and at the end of the year, and said, you know, who's going to be man of the year, and why is he or she or it, as the computer was computer of the year in 1982 with because they couldn't figure out whether it was going to be Steve Jobs or Bill Gates who ought to get the cover. But as you think forward to December and that group of really smart people that you've interacted with saying, okay, well, the news of 2020 is without a doubt the COVID crisis. But fast forward to December. What's the cover? Is it that molecule that just says it wiped out the economy and the health of the world, et cetera, et cetera? Is it somebody's found a vaccine and we're rapidly developing the vaccine? Is it the resilience of the U.S. healthcare worker who showed up every day and protected us? If you had to kind of think ahead and say, well, what I'd really love it to be is X, or what I think it's going to be is Y, try and think about that table in mid-December, figuring out what's going to be on the cover of Time magazine, and give us your thoughts on it.
Well, Willie, just hearing you talk about it, it just shows like you grew up in this world and culture, because you really cover like this. You said the things that I would immediately think of as possibilities based on what we know now. Now, maybe there will be, you know, if there is some a really important medical breakthrough, or some, you know, an individual who does something extraordinary on the research, medical, or healthcare side, I think that person would be a strong contender for a person of the year. But the molecule, which is, you know, quite vivid to look at least the pictures I've seen, would, you know, is certainly an idea. And then in terms of the, you know, where we are in the bounce back, like when you talk about the, you know, the resilience of either the world or a particular country or a group of people, you know, those are all options. But there's no way, knowing what I do, it's been a long time since I've been at Time magazine. I left in 2008, but and there's a whole new set of people there. But knowing what I do about that process, it seems unimaginable, even in late April, that the person of the year or the thing of the year or the idea of the year won't have something to do with COVID. COVID-19 and its impact on the world and the response to it.
And that is said during an election year, which is
yeah.
quite
right. I mean, one thing that was
we're not
always
get on this call, but yes, it's unbelievable that you can say almost declaratorily that in an election year.
Right, because every year that I worked there, and I think every year since, every fourth year, the winner of the election was the person of the year. And I of course, again, I have no insight into the thinking of folks who run Time Magazine now, but it's tough to imagine even a presidential election having, winning an argument as more important to the world, more influential for better or worse than this crisis. It's unlike obviously anything that's happened in our lifetimes and really in anyone's lifetimes because of especially in the more modern world, not since the Spanish flu.
Well, Jay, we're now at the bottom of the hour. I want to thank you tremendously for spending an hour with us. I know your thoughts and ideas and perspective on all this has been greatly appreciated, not only by me, but by everyone who's been listening in. Thank you, my friend. To everybody else, thanks for joining in this week. Next week, we have co-CEO of Carlyle Group, Glenn Youngkin, joining us. And so I hope you'll be able to find some time to tune back in. Jay, thanks again, and have a great day.
Thanks, Willie. Thanks, everybody.
Take care.